heard the steps long before I saw the shape. They moved around our camp in a slow, deliberate circle, heavy as a man in snowshoes, yet leaving no sound upon the crusted snow, only upon the frozen earth beneath my own ribs. The fire burned low, the dogs lay flattened and mute, and the canvas wall beside my head drew inward, as if pressed by a careful, unseen hand. Men have pressed me, in these later years, to set down what befell us on the Stuart River, and I find I cannot refuse them, though I doubt their wisdom. If you would hear more of such journeys, and weigh them one against another, lend your ear, give your approval, and leave your own recollections or questions in writing, as men once did by post. To understand that night, I must return to the first days of December in the year 1913, when our party left Dawson for the upper reaches of the Yukon territory. I was 29 years of age then, employed as a surveyor's assistant, though in truth I carried a rifle more often than a compass. The Dominion government wished to know what lay along certain tributaries of the Stuart, where rumours of workable claims and good trapping had reached Ottawa in vague, excited letters. We were 4 men. Henderson, a Scotsman and licensed surveyor, had the command and the instruments, a brass transit, a prismatic compass, and a canvas roll of maps already smudged with grease and coal dust. Karen, a French-Canadian from Quebec City, trapped for the Hudson's Bay Company and served as our hunter. Young Miller, only 22, had come up from Seattle with dreams of striking his own ground once the season's work was done. I, James Clark of Winnipeg, kept the log, sketched the country, and minded the stores. We set out from Dawson on sleds drawn by 8 dogs, following the frozen ribbon of the Stuart eastward. The air had the hard, dry bite peculiar to that country, so cold that one's breath fell in tiny crystals. Our equipment was of the time: canvas tents, woolen blankets, carbide lamps, a small folding stove, and 3 Winchester rifles between us, with a Colt revolver that Henderson wore at his belt more for show than use. We navigated by the river's bends, by Henderson's compass, and by such landmarks as the prospectors had named: Deadfall Bar, Split Rock, and the long, straight reach they called the Minister's Sermon. Those first days passed in an honest hardship that any northern man would recognize. We rose in darkness, struck camp with fingers numbed despite our mitts, and moved until the short light failed. The only sounds were the runners on snow, the dog's breath, the occasional crack of river ice shifting beneath its own weight. At night, we heard wolves now and then, thin and far off, and once the hoarse cough of a moose. The first odd thing we noticed, I dismissed at once. It was on the 5th day out, near a low range of timbered hills east of a creek, the old maps named Coal Creek. We had made camp in a stand of black spruce, their tops feathered with hoarfrost. While Karen skinned a hare and Henderson bent over his notes, Miller and I walked a little way from the fire to fetch more deadfall. "There," Miller said, pausing. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first I heard only the usual sounds: the faint hiss of the stove, the dogs shifting in the snow, the wind moving through the spruce. Then, beneath it, I thought I heard a soft, regular scuffing, as of someone pacing in the dark beyond the firelight, just at the edge of hearing. "It is the trees," I said. "They creak when the frost takes them." Miller frowned. "Trees do not step, Mr. Clark." We brought the wood back and spoke no more of it. Later, by the fire, as we shared a pipe, Miller told me of his mother in Tacoma, who had sewed an extra lining into his coat and wrapped his Bible in oilcloth against the damp. "She said I was a fool to come so far north," he said, smiling into the flames, "but she tied my scarf herself. I told her I would return in 2 years with pockets full of gold, and she said she would be content if I came back with all my fingers. "You will have more than that," I said. "These lands are not as wild as the stories make them. Men have been through here for 20 years now. There is little left that has not been named." I believed it then. The Yukon, to my mind, was a place of cold and hardship, but not of mysteries. We had compasses, rifles, and government backing. What could the wilderness hold that 4 armed men and a team of dogs could not master? On the 7th day, the weather turned. A high, thin overcast spread across the sky, and the light took on a flat, pewter quality. The temperature rose slightly, which in that country is often worse than a clear, bitter cold. A dampness crept into everything. The dogs' coats clung in dark patches, and the snow under our runners grew heavy and reluctant. It was that afternoon that we found the first tracks. We had stopped to rest the dogs on a narrow reach of river where the banks rose in low, brushy bluffs. Karen went up with his rifle to look for signs of ptarmigan and called to us a moment later. "Come see this," he said. "I do not know this spoor." The 4 of us stood in a small clearing where the snow lay in a smooth, untouched sheet, except for a single line of impressions that crossed it from one thicket to another. They were not wolf, nor moose, nor bear. Each mark was long, almost oval, with a narrower heel and a broad, splayed forepart, as if a man had walked there in some kind of crude snowshoe. Yet there were no signs of webbing, no pattern of rawhide. The edges were clean, the depth uniform, as if whatever had made them weighed a good deal more than a man. "Some trapper's rig," I said. "Perhaps one of the Indians from further upriver. They fashion their own shoes." Karen shook his head slowly. "I have hunted with the Tutchone," he said. "Their shoes do not look like this, and see the distance between them." He was right. The stride was long, unnaturally so, each print nearly 4 feet from the next. No man of ordinary stature could have walked so without breaking into a run, and yet the impressions were steady and regular, as if the maker had moved with slow assurance. Henderson knelt and measured with a strip of wood. 11 inches, he said, possibly 12. A tall fellow, that is all. We are wasting time. Mark the direction, Clark, and let us be on. I wrote it in the log that evening under the heading Unusual Spoor, possibly native. I did not mention that the line of tracks began at the edge of the clearing and ended at the opposite edge, with no sign of approach or departure in the surrounding brush. At the time, I told myself that the wind had drifted over the earlier marks, or that I had simply not looked closely enough. Memory, I thought, tended to invent puzzles where none existed. The days grew shorter. We left the main course of the Stewart to follow a lesser branch, unnamed on our older charts, which Henderson had marked in pencil as East Fork. Our intention was to establish a small winter camp near its headwaters, from which we could survey the surrounding ridges and perhaps cut a trail to the next drainage before the spring breakup. The further we went, the more the country closed around us. The river narrowed, shouldered by steep, timbered slopes that admitted little light. The snow under the trees was not the clean, open expanse of the main valley, but a lumpy, uneven crust, broken by windfall and hidden stones. Our progress slowed to a crawl. The dogs grew surly. Once, near midday, we came upon a place where the forest fell abruptly silent. No jay called, no squirrel chattered. The only sound was the faint ticking of frost in the branches. "That is strange," Karen murmured. "There are always birds when there is timber." We moved on, and after half a mile, the usual sounds returned. I told myself that the silence had been a trick of the wind, nothing more. It was on the 11th day, when we were perhaps 30 miles up the East Fork, that the thing began in earnest. We had made camp on a small bench above the river, where the wind had scoured the snow down to a hard, glittering crust. The night was overcast, the sky a low lid of cloud that reflected our fire in a dull, coppery glow. The dogs lay in a rough circle beyond the tents, their chains clinking softly as they shifted. I woke an hour past midnight with the peculiar certainty that something had changed. At first I thought it was the cold, for the air in the tent felt heavier, as if the canvas had thickened. Then I realized what it was. I could hear nothing outside. No wind, no creak of trees, no dogs stirring. The silence pressed at my ears until I fancied I could hear my own pulse. Beside me, Miller slept on his side, his breath a faint mist. I lay still, listening. After a time that felt longer than it could have been, I heard it. A single, deliberate step in the snow, somewhere beyond the tent. Then another, and another, slow and measured, circling. I told myself it was Karen, up to relieve himself, or perhaps checking on the dogs. Yet the steps did not move towards the animals, nor towards the fire. They moved around us in a wide arc, pausing now and then, as if the walker turned its head to regard the tents. I reached for the rifle I kept beside my bedroll, my fingers clumsy with fear and cold. As I did so, Miller's eyes opened. He looked at me without moving his head, and I saw in them that he too had heard. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. "Yes," I said. "Do not speak." The steps ceased. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, so faintly that I might have imagined it, I heard the soft click of a claw or nail upon ice, close beside my head, where the frozen ground lay just beyond the canvas. The dogs did not bark. That, more than anything, unnerved me. In all my travels, I had never known sled dogs to meet an intruder with silence. They might growl, or whine, or throw themselves at their chains, but they did not lie still as stones. In the morning, when the pale light seeped through the clouds, we went out to look. The snow around the tents was unmarked, save for our own tracks and the dogs' restless circles. There was no sign of any visitor. "Dreams," Henderson said briskly when I told him. "You are overtired, Clark. Men hear all manner of things in their sleep out here." Miller said nothing. He only looked at the dogs, who lay with their noses tucked under their tails, their eyes showing the whites. That day, we found more of the strange tracks, this time on the river itself. They crossed our trail at a right angle, coming down from the timber on the south bank and vanishing into the brush on the north. Again, the stride was unnaturally long, the impressions deep and clean, as if whatever had made them had passed only minutes before. Yet we had seen nothing, heard nothing. "Moose," Henderson said, though he did not sound convinced. "A moose with some deformity of the hoof." "Moose do not walk like that," Karen replied quietly, "and they do not cross without leaving some sign of their passage in the willows. See how the branches stand. Nothing has brushed them." We argued a little, more from unease than from any desire to persuade. In the end, Henderson ordered us on. He was not a man to admit to uncertainty. Around the middle of December, the weather cleared. A hard, high pressure settled over the valley, bringing with it a bitter clarity. The sky turned a pale, enameled blue. Sound carried strangely. A cough or a dog's bark seemed to hang in the air long after its source had ceased. It was on one of those days, when the cold burned the inside of one's nostrils, that the first of our equipment failed without reason. We had stopped on a low rise to take a bearing. Henderson set up the brass transit on its tripod, his breath smoking around his beard. I stood by with the notebook, waiting for the angle. Suddenly he swore. "The damned thing," he said. "It is sticking." He worked the instrument's fine screws, his gloves off despite the cold. The transit's needle, which had swung freely that morning, now hung sluggish and uncertain, as if some invisible syrup had thickened around it. When at last it moved, it did so in jerks, refusing to settle. The compass in his hand behaved no better. Its card wobbled, swung to north, then drifted several degrees and stayed there, quivering. There must be some local attraction, I suggested. Iron in the ground, perhaps. Then it is the largest deposit in the world, Henderson snapped. We are miles from any recorded lode. This is nonsense. We tried my smaller pocket compass. It too wandered, its needle trembling as if in agitation. At last we took a rough bearing from the sun, though it stood low and indistinct in the southern sky, and moved on. That night the wind returned in fitful gusts, making the spruce moan above our camp. I was on the first watch, sitting by the fire with my coat drawn tight and my rifle across my knees. The dogs lay in a loose half-circle beyond, their backs to the dark. It was then, at about the 40th minute of that hour, that the shock came. Without warning, every dog sprang to its feet and lunged towards the trees, their chains snapping taut. They did not bark at first. They strained and whined, their bodies low to the ground, as if they wished both to flee and to attack. The hair along their spines stood up in a ridge. One of them, a big grey lead dog named Samson, threw himself sideways so violently that his chainring snapped from the stake. He bolted into the dark with a sound that was half yelp, half howl. "Samson," I called, rising. At the same instant, something moved between the trees beyond the firelight, a tall, pale shape that passed from one trunk to another with a smooth, unhurried motion. I saw it only for the space of a heartbeat, no more than a suggestion of height and pallor against the deeper black. Yet the air around me seemed to thicken, and a pressure built in my ears as if the world itself were holding its breath. Miller burst from the tent, half-dressed, his rifle in hand. "What is it?" he cried. "I do not know," I said. "It went that way." We stood there, 3 men and a wavering circle of firelight, the forest pressing in like a wall. The dogs whined and circled, their chains clinking. Samson did not return. We called until our voices cracked, then stood in silence, listening for any sound of him. There was nothing. The next morning, ashamed of our fear, we searched the woods. We found Samson's broken chain where it had caught on a root, and beyond it, a patch of churned snow where he had struggled. There was blood, bright against the white, and a scattering of coarse, grey hairs. No tracks led away from that place. The snow around it lay smooth and undisturbed, save for our own prints. We did not speak much over breakfast. Henderson's face was set and pale under his beard. Karen crossed himself when he thought no one watched. Miller stared at the trees, his jaw working. "Something took that dog," he said at last. "Something that did not wish to leave a sign." "Wolverine," Henderson said. "They are devils when cornered. They climb trees, they drop from above. The snow is too wind-scoured to hold their trace." Karen shook his head. "I have seen what a wolverine does," he said. "It leaves more of a mess than that." For the first time since we left Dawson, I saw doubt in Henderson's eyes. It was gone in a moment, replaced by iron determination. He ordered us to break camp and press on. The days that followed took on a strained, brittle quality, as if the world itself might crack underfoot. We spoke little on the trail. At night we drew the tents closer to the fire and kept our rifles within reach. The strange steps returned more than once, circling our camp at the edge of hearing. Sometimes I fancied I heard a low, almost conversational murmur with them, as if someone spoke in a language too distant to distinguish. Once, waking from a shallow doze, I found that my bedroll had been shifted a hand's breadth from where I had laid it, though no one admitted to touching it. Another time, Henderson's notebook, which he always kept under his coat, went missing for half a day, only to reappear neatly wrapped in oilcloth atop a pile of snowshoes outside the tent. These small disarrangements worked upon our nerves more than any open threat might have done. It was as if some unseen intelligence moved among our belongings, curious but not yet hostile. By the 20th of December, we had reached the head of the East Fork, where the river dwindled into a series of narrow, ice-choked channels between low, rounded hills. Here, Henderson declared, we would make our winter camp. We built a more substantial shelter of logs and canvas, banked with snow, and raised a cache for our provisions in the crotch of a tall spruce. The place had a desolate beauty. On clear days, the sky arched over us like glass. The snow on the hills shone with a faint bluish light even at noon. Yet there was something in the air there, some quality of stillness that set my teeth on edge. Sound did not carry as it ought. A shout seemed to fall at one's feet like a stone. We settled into a routine of sorts. Each day, two of us would go out to take bearings and sketch the surrounding country, while the others hunted and maintained the camp. The phenomenon, if I may call it that, did not abate. If anything, it grew more familiar, as if the presence that walked around us had grown accustomed to our company. One afternoon, as I returned from a short excursion to the nearest ridge, I found Miller sitting alone by the fire, his Bible open on his knees. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed. "Where are the others?" I asked. "Up at the cache," he said. "A mink found its way into the flour. They are trying to mend the damage." He hesitated, then closed the book. "Mr. Clark," he said, "do you think we are alone here?" "In what sense?" I asked, though I knew what he meant. "In the human sense," he said. "I have not seen a single trapline, no old fire rings, no cut stumps. No man has wintered here, I think. And yet," he gestured towards the trees, "something walks at night, something that knows our habits. Last night, I heard it at my very ear. It breathed. I swear it did." I looked at the young man, at the trembling in his hands. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him that there was some simple explanation we had not yet grasped. Instead, I said, "We are 4 armed men with ample provisions. Whatever is out there, if anything, has not harmed us. We must keep our heads." He nodded, but I could see that my words had not reached him. The days shortened to a few hours of weak light. The cold deepened. Once, in the pale noon, we saw a band of caribou moving along a distant ridge, their bodies dark against the snow. As we watched, they broke into a sudden, panicked run, scattering in all directions. No wolf pursued them. They ran as if from a sound we could not hear. The peak of our encounter came on the night of 23 December. The day had been unusually calm. We had taken advantage of the still air to extend our survey to a higher hill to the north, from which Henderson hoped to obtain a view of the next valley. The climb was taxing, the snow lay deep and dry, and the slope was steeper than it had appeared. By the time we returned, the light was already failing. We ate in a weary silence and turned in early. I remember the feel of the blanket over my shoulders, the faint smell of wood smoke in the canvas, the distant pop of the fire outside as a log shifted. Sleep took me quickly. I woke to a pressure on my chest. For a moment I thought the tent had collapsed. I could not draw a full breath. The air felt thick and cold, as if I lay at the bottom of a well. Then I realized that the canvas still arched above me, faintly outlined by the dying glow of the fire. The weight on my chest was not cloth or snow, it was something else, something that did not quite touch me, and yet held me fast. My arms would not move. My legs lay heavy and unresponsive. I could hear my own heart, loud in my ears, and beneath it, a sound like slow, deliberate breathing that was not mine. Beside me, Miller slept on, or seemed to. His face was turned towards me, his eyes half open, the whites showing. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The breathing grew louder. It seemed to come from directly above my face, though I could see nothing there, only a faint distortion in the air, as if the light itself had thickened. The smell that came with it was not of decay or musk, but something dry and cold, like old stone in a cellar that has never known the sun. A voice spoke then, very softly, in a language I did not know. The words had a cadence, a rhythm almost like chanting, but there was no comfort in it. The sound seemed to bypass my ears and press directly upon my mind, a series of shapes without meaning. I do not know how long this lasted. Time, in that moment, lost its ordinary measure. At last, with a suddenness that made me gasp, the weight lifted. I could move again. I sat up, choking, and flung my arm towards where I thought the thing had been. My hand met only cold air. Outside, the fire had burned low. The dogs were silent. The night beyond the tent opening was a solid wall of black. "Miller," I whispered, "are you awake?" He turned his head slowly towards me. His eyes were fully open now, and there was a look in them I shall never forget, a mixture of awe and terror. "It was leaning over you," he said. "I saw its shape, tall, like a man, but thin, as if made of smoke. It bent down as if to listen to your breath." "Why did you not call out?" I demanded, my own voice shaking. "I could not," he said simply. My tongue felt frozen. We woke the others then. Henderson listened with a stony face, his jaw clenched. Karen crossed himself openly this time. "We leave," he said, at first light. "This place is wrong." Henderson hesitated. We had not yet completed our surveys. To turn back would mean failure in the eyes of the men who had sent us. Yet he was no fool. He had seen enough in his years in the north to know when a man's luck had turned. "Very well," he said at last. "We break camp at dawn. No one goes alone. If any of you hears or sees anything in the night, you wake the others, no matter what." None of us slept much after that. The presence did not return in so direct a fashion, but more than once I heard the faint crunch of steps beyond the tent, and once the soft, almost curious rustle of fingers against the canvas. Morning came at last, a dim grey seepage between the trees. We packed with a tense efficiency, each man moving as if afraid to linger at any task. The air felt heavier than usual, the silence of the place more pronounced. Even the scrape of our sled runners seemed muffled. As we set off down the East Fork, the dogs pulled hard, as if eager to leave. The first miles passed without incident. The sky remained overcast, the light flat. Our breath smoked around us in ragged plumes. It was only when we reached the place where we had lost Samson that the sense of being watched returned with full force. The patch of churned snow and old blood was still visible, rimed with frost. As we passed it, every dog in the team veered sharply away, nearly overturning the sled. Their ears were flat, their tails tucked. "Easy," Karen murmured, struggling with the traces. "Easy, boys." Something moved in the trees above us. Not a branch, not the ordinary sway of wind, but a vertical motion, as if something tall had withdrawn deeper into the shadows. I saw only the afterimage of it, a faint, lighter patch against the dark trunks. We did not stop to investigate. The journey back to the main Stuart was a blur of effort and unease. We pushed the dogs hard, covering in 3 days what had taken us 5 on the way in. At night, we made only the smallest of fires and kept close watch. The strange steps followed us for 2 nights, then fell away. Once, in the early hours, I heard a sound like distant laughter, thin and high, carried on the wind from far up valley. It might have been a fox. I do not think it was. When at last we reached the broader river and the more traveled trail, a palpable relief settled over us. The air seemed to lighten. The dog's posture eased. We saw old campsites, the black circles of other men's fires, and the sight of those ordinary human traces steadied us more than I can say. We reached Dawson in the first week of January, gaunt and frostburned, but alive. The town, with its rough-hewn buildings and yellow lamps, seemed almost indecently warm and bright after the pale silence of the upper valley. Our arrival caused some comment. Men noted that we were short one dog, that we spoke little of the country we had seen. Henderson reported at once to the government agent, a stout man named Wallace, who had never been more than a day's sled from town. In the small, overheated office above the post, Henderson laid out his maps and notes. I sat at his side with my log, Miller and Karen behind us. "You were gone 34 days, Wallace said, peering at the papers through wire-rimmed spectacles. "You have brought back some useful data, Mr. Henderson. These ridges here, this possible pass, yes, this will do. Any trouble with the weather?" "Some," Henderson said. "The usual cold. No storms of note. Game sufficient?" "Barely," he said. "We lost one dog to a wolverine." I felt Miller shift behind me at that. The word hung in the air like a lie one hopes will pass for truth. "Any contact with natives?" Wallace asked. "The Tuchoni, perhaps?" There were reports they had moved further up the Stewart. "None," Henderson said. "That upper fork appears largely uninhabited." Wallace nodded, satisfied. "Very good. We shall have your full written report in due course, of course. For now, you may rest. The Dominion thanks you for your service." Outside, in the cold air of the street, Miller rounded on Henderson. "Why did you not tell him?" he demanded. "About the tracks, about the thing in the tent." Henderson's face was grey with fatigue. "And what would you have me say?" he replied. "That we were frightened by bad dreams and odd noises? That our compasses misbehaved? Men lose their instruments to frost and magnetism every year. Dogs run off. If I tell them more, they will say we were drunk or unfit. They will send others into that valley, and if nothing happens to them, we will be a laughingstock." "And if something does?" Miller asked, his voice low. Henderson looked at him for a long moment. "Then it will be their report, not ours," he said. "I will not write my own ruin with my own hand." In the end, the official account that went to Ottawa made no mention of strange tracks or silent steps. It spoke of difficult terrain, of extreme cold, of the probable existence of a pass to the next drainage. It noted the loss of one dog to predation by local fauna. It concluded that further exploration in the area would be challenging, but not impossible, given adequate preparation. My own log, which contained more detail, I kept to myself. I copied out a Baudelarized version for the record, omitting the worst of what we had experienced. The original I, wrapped in oilcloth and placed among my personal effects. Life resumed its ordinary course, or appeared to. I returned to Winnipeg in the spring, took up a modest position with the Railway Survey, and in time married. Yet the valley on the East Fork did not leave me. In the second winter after our return, I woke one night in our small house to a familiar weight on my chest. For a moment I was back in that canvas tent, the smell of cold stone in my nostrils. I could not move. The darkness of the room seemed to press in from all sides. Then my wife turned in her sleep beside me, and the spell broke. I lay there, my nightshirt damp with sweat, listening to the faint sounds of the city beyond the frosted window wagon wheels, a distant train whistle. No steps circled our bed. Yet I could not shake the sense that something had leaned close to listen as I slept. Years later, in 1921, I traveled to Vancouver on railway business. In a dockside tavern one evening, I heard a familiar laugh. Turning, I saw Karen, older and broader in the face, his hair streaked with grey. We greeted each other with genuine warmth. There are some experiences that bind men more tightly than blood. Over a bottle of whiskey, he told me he had given up the North for good. "I trap now only in memory," he said. "There is enough wildness in the sea for me." After a time, when the talk had run through the safe topics of wives and work, I asked, "Have you been back to the Stuart since our journey?" He shook his head sharply. "None. I go nowhere near that fork. Once was enough." "You still think of it?" I asked. He looked into his glass. "When the wind is wrong," he said. "When the house is too quiet. Sometimes, in the night, I hear the dogs rise all at once. In my mind, I hear their chains. Then I remember there are no dogs here." We did not speak of it further. There was no need. In 1925, a small notice appeared in a northern paper that reached me by chance. It spoke of a party of prospectors who had gone missing in the upper Stuart country, somewhere east of a tributary that might have been our East Fork. Their camp, when found in the spring, was in disarray. Their tools lay scattered. There were no bodies. The only sign of life was a ring of dog tracks around the remains of a fire, as if the animals had run in circles until they dropped. The article attributed the loss to a blizzard. I cut out the notice and placed it with my old log. As the years have passed, I have tried at times to rationalize what we experienced. I have read reports of magnetic anomalies, of infrasound in certain valleys that can cause unease and hallucinations. I have considered the effects of extreme cold and isolation on the mind. All of these explanations have some merit. Perhaps our compasses failed from a local iron deposit. Perhaps the steps we heard were our own hearts, magnified by the silence. Perhaps the weight on my chest was no more than a paralytic dream. Yet there remain details that resist such soothing. The line of tracks that began and ended in untouched snow. The missing dog, taken without a trail. The notebook that vanished and returned, wrapped more carefully than we had left it. The way the dogs lay flat and silent as the unseen steps passed by. I have told this story to only a few. Some listened politely and changed the subject. Others laughed and said that men in the north see all manner of queer things and that the mind plays tricks in the cold. A very few, those who have wintered beyond the last line of telegraph poles, nodded once and said nothing at all. I have not returned to that valley, nor do I intend to. I am an old man now. My hands shake when I hold a pen. The world has moved on. There are aeroplanes over the prairies and wireless sets in parlors. Men speak of conquering every last wilderness. Perhaps they will. Perhaps there is no corner of the earth that a motor and a good map cannot reach. Yet I think of that place on the East Fork, where sound falls at one's feet and the snow holds what it chooses. I think of the way something moved among our tents without leaving a mark, as if it belonged more to the cold itself than to any living thing we know. What disturbs me most, even now, is not the night when it leaned over me, nor the loss of the dog, nor the laughter on the wind. It is the memory of that first evening, when the steps went round and round our camp and the dogs lay pressed to the earth, their eyes wide, their mouths shut. They knew, before we did, that there are presences which do not fear rifles or fire. Sometimes, in the small hours, when the city is quiet and the furnace has gone out, I wake to a peculiar stillness. The house seems to hold its breath. In that pause I hear, faint and far off, the slow, deliberate crunch of a foot upon snow, circling not my bed now, but some other camp in some other lonely valley. And I know, with a certainty I cannot justify, that whatever walked beyond our fire that winter has never left those hills. It is there still, patient in the cold, listening to the breath of any man foolish enough to sleep within its hearing.